My name is Kristina. I'm in second year Sociology and Communications at McMaster University. I'm 19 years old, I'm a figure skater, and my favorite color is blue. When you typically introduce yourself to somebody, they'll smile back at you. They'll say things like, "It's nice to meet you," or "Hi, how are you?" And for a really long time, my response was, "I'm good, thanks, and you?" Little did most people know that behind my smile, I was struggling. Little do most people know that I have a mental illness. It all started when I was 12 years old. It was the first day back at school after the winter break, and I felt more alone than ever before. At this point in time, I had been the victim of bullying for 2 years since I had moved to my new school. I couldn't quite figure out why they were picking on me in specific, but I remember feeling this sense of guilt over my mere existence. And I remember being at recess one day and falling and finding comfort in the pain. For me, physical pain was a lot easier to deal with than emotional pain. It calmed me down, and to this day, it still does. But when you're 12 years old and you're upset about something, you're gonna get two responses. People are gonna laugh at you, or they're gonna tell you that you're being a moody preteen and you need to get over it. The problem with this is that it's pretty emotionally invalidating. You're telling somebody that they're too weak, that they're too sensitive. You're pushing them as far away as possible, and you're outcasting them. And in one way or another, you're stigmatizing them for their behavior. Now, stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. After this day, stigma followed me everywhere I went, but it was most prominent when I was in high school. Coming into high school, I had a lot of the similar coping mechanisms that I did in elementary school. A, because they were addictive, and B, because I didn't find anything else that really worked. But this time was a little bit different. I tried to hide it, both physically and emotionally. I was determined to be this fun, outgoing person so I could make more and more friends. And I did. I made so many friends, and it was incredible, but I wasn't happy. And then I met this one individual in particular, and we got very close, and eventually we started dating. Now, when people found out that I was gay, they were so quick to bully me all over again. I remember just being put in this box of an other, a box of the lesbian stereotype. And for a while, I would walk to school in the morning and cross the parking lot, and there would be a group of guys standing there catcalling me as I did. This went on for 3 months straight. I turned to my friends and tried to tell them that this is what was going on, and I was met with some not so great advice. It went a little something like this: "Boys will be boys. You just need to get over it. That's what you get for coming out of the closet." I became so self-destructive. It hurt, but the worst was yet to come. Even though I didn't realize it at the very beginning, my relationship at the time was abusive. And even though I didn't really know how to get out of the relationship. And to be honest, I didn't really want to, despite the pain that it caused me. I wanted somebody to love me. But the problem is, I still went to my friends and I told them that this was making me upset. And they told me that it was my fault. I was too weak. I couldn't deal with the messiness that came with love. And if I was being treated like this, I should just walk away. And if I couldn't do that, it was on me. After you hear these things and people kind of start putting you down, you start to internalize them quite a bit. And for me, that just meant my symptoms got a lot worse. And within what felt like no time at all, I was treating myself worse than I had ever treated anybody before. Worse than I ever thought I was capable of treating another human being. So what did I do? Well, I did what any other 15-year-old girl would do at the time. I went on Tumblr. And I'm scrolling through my dashboard one day, and these words came up on my screen. "Having a mental illness is like being in an abusive relationship with yourself." But you see, mine wasn't just in my head. Mine was in every single interaction that I had. And this was because of that guilt. I felt guilty over my mere existence for being this burden on the people around me. So I did everything possible to make sure that everyone liked me. I was so selfless. And in doing that, it kind of gave a lot of people venues to take advantage of me. And then I would get hurt. I would get upset. And I'd make them feel guilty. And this cycle of guilt just went on and on and on. And this is because of that first relationship that I was telling you about. I was taught in that relationship that love was selflessness. It was hiding everything that made you upset and making sure that on the surface, you made sure that they were happy. It was distorted. All the horrible things became normal. And at one point, I very much was taught that if I can't get her to love me, then nobody else ever will. And so that's why when she broke up with me, I panicked. It was the most terrifying sense of abandonment that I had ever felt in my entire life. And I couldn't understand why I was so scared because I had been single before. What was different now? But yet this kind of awful feeling remained. And I resorted back to old coping mechanisms, and they were worse than ever before. And eventually, I ended up in the hospital. Hospital, yeah, that's right. So I'm gonna get so much more help now, right? That's what they're supposed to do. Wrong. I went into the emergency room, and I was brought into a specific ward. I was made to sit in a room with 4 white walls and a couch that was bolted to the ground. I sat there for 9 hours as I waited to be seen, my mind circling farther and farther into the drain. And the worst part was that the doctor came in after all this time and took one look at this sad little heartbroken girl in front of him and was like, oh yeah, I think you have clinical depression and anxiety. Here's a prescription for Prozac. You can leave now. They sent me home. I was furious. I didn't want to be there to begin with. I didn't want medication. And I would go on to a year later to stop taking it. I was made to sit and wait for this guy for 9 hours for him to tell me something that at that point, I already knew. I knew I was sick. But the worst part about it all was that this doctor ended up giving me the wrong diagnosis. Now, in reference to my high school experience as a whole, stigma's pretty obvious. But stigma can be something as simple as defining mental health or mental illness as sadness or stress alone. You see, mental health is like this ever-changing spectrum, wherein you can have somebody with a mental illness who has really, really good days, and vice versa. And kind of where I'm going with this is that mental health is flexible. So why do we have stigma? Why are we defining the people around us by their worst days, their worst behavior, and their most negative labels? We're all trying to do this crazy life thing together. We're all growing and we're all changing. So why are we treating other people like this? Now I'm gonna fast forward in my story a little bit to last year. After another destructive night, I found myself in the Student Wellness Center. I was in this dimly lit room, and I was sitting down, opening my closet doors to reveal things like abuse and loss and hopelessness, all over the floor in front of a complete stranger once again. And with what felt like hours went by, even though it was probably only 10 minutes, she came back and told me the diagnosis that changed my life. I have severe generalized anxiety disorder and borderline personality disorder. Now there's a fun diagnosis for you. Borderline personality disorder, commonly stereotyped as being needy, clingy, psychotic. And my mood, it can change at the drop of a hat. And although I knew the stereotypes that were associated with this, I felt pretty calm. I started to do my research. I researched more and more, and although it was pretty difficult to read, things were finally making sense. My emotions seemed to be validated. I started to understand why I was having these awful feelings, where they were coming from. And most importantly, I didn't feel alone anymore. I knew that there were other people who struggled just as much as I did. And through all this reading, I became self-aware. And I think that's a really critical thing in when you decide that you're gonna take the journey towards recovery. Now, Kira Van Gelder kind of explains borderline in this way. She says that people with borderline are like emotional epileptics, thrown from one horrible fit of suffering to another, poisoned by everything inside of us, and vulnerable to everything outside of us. And although this kind of leads the way to a pretty difficult life to begin with, the worst thing is feeling like you're not allowed to be upset, even though you have so many reasons in your head to be. I was living this sort of paradox where I was put in situations that were supposed to make me happy, but I physically could not be happy. I was told that I had to be perfect, but when I got so overwhelmed by trying to achieve this perfection, people yelled at me for what I did. The expectations piled on and piled on and piled on, and as a result, I created multiple different personalities that would deal with each one. And eventually, you get a little overwhelmed, you get confused, and a lot of negative behavior comes out. And again, I was further stereotyped and stigmatized for my behavior. Now that in a nutshell is kind of how stigma has affected me. But what about everyone else? Well, 57% of Canadians think that the stigma associated with mental illness has gotten better in the past 5 years. Okay, yeah, I agree. But then I heard statistics like this. 57% of Canadians would not enter a spousal relationship with somebody who has a mental illness. 46% of Canadians think that mental illness is an excuse for bad behavior. And 27% of Canadians think that people with a mental illness are dangerous or scary. You can imagine what I felt reading these. I have this intensive fear of being abandoned and being lonely. And now I know that people don't want to be around me just because of this label. But I can't even begin to imagine what it feels like for somebody who has something like schizophrenia or PTSD, two disorders that are so commonly stigmatized as being dangerous. But here's the question I want to ask you. If we're so afraid of these people, how are they supposed to get help? And mental illness is pretty common, too. 17% of Canadians aged 15 or older have reported having a mental health care need in the past year. 1/3 of these individuals have had their needs fully met, and the rate is even lower for children and youth. Now imagine what would happen if we had a little bit more education around this. What would happen if we weren't so afraid of these individuals? But education isn't the only thing that we need. It's funding. So mental illness accounts for 10% of the disease rate in Ontario, or the disease burden in Ontario. 7% of healthcare dollars go towards mental illness. So relative to this burden, mental health care in Ontario is underfunded by $1.5 billion. Now, why is it the case? Well, to put it bluntly, psychology isn't seen as very important. The treatments associated with it are not scientific enough, because as of right now, there aren't very many pinpointed brain pathologies or physical causes that we can attribute to these disorders. Pharmaceutical companies hear this, and they shy away from collaborating with scientists. They shy away from providing further funding, because who wants to fund for something that has no concretes? But again, imagine what would happen if this stigma that was there in the first place was gone. Now, I understand that the deconstruction of stigma is not that simple. And one of the biggest challenges with this is because regardless of whether or not you have experience with mental illness, it's very, very hard for somebody on the outside to see or understand what's going on the inside. And so we're starting to see this cool thing emerge of resilience-themed art projects. These are projects that allow people who are struggling to kind of creatively and metaphorically express what's going on in the inside. And that way people on the outside can kind of get a bit of a better understanding of really what's going on. Additionally, we have mental health awareness campaigns. And I'm not the biggest fan of these, to be quite honest, but the thing now is that we're starting to move into something that's more educational based. We're looking at things that are not just depression and anxiety and the stereotypical ways of self-care. We're looking at uncommon diagnoses, and we're trying to uncover what life with them is like. In addition to this, in Canada, we see an increase in mental health first aid. We see an increase in data collection and research. And we also see that things like the Canadian Association for Mental Health is kind of looking at working with First Nations and Métis and Inuit individuals because we understand that their culture is a little bit different than ours, and therefore their needs are going to be a little bit different as well. On a global level, we have Safe Talk Suicide Alert helpers in over 20 countries. This is all incredible, but there's always going to be more that we can do to fight the stigma. There's always going to be more to make it easier for generations to come. And I think that's the coolest part about what we're doing. It's that it's not just about making things better for our world. It's about making things better for theirs. And yeah, if you've seen the Ant-Man movie, you know that that quote is straight out of there. And I know that this isn't Ant-Man, but it's going to become relevant in a second, I promise. Everyone expects me to stand up here and give some moving speech about how I'm a survivor. But I'm not ready to talk about it as if it's over, because it'll never be over. I live with mental illness. It's a very big part of who I am, but it's only one part of me. And with the help of people like you, we can spread awareness. We can spread education. We can fund. You can help me to be able to share my experiences more openly with those around me and have my emotions validated. I can share my diagnosis and not be afraid of people running away from me. I can create pretty positive relationships as well that really respect who I am. And most importantly, I can do something like this. Hi, my name is Kristina. I've been struggling with mental illness for 7 years now. And it's because of that that I've learned what it means to be resilient. I've learned that it's braver to be Clark Kent than it is to be Superman. And yeah, I am still in recovery, and I'm doing more and more every day. But I can see a future ahead, and I'm pretty hopeful for it. I'm very proud of myself for all that I've done, and I really hope that in everything you do, you are as well. My name is Kristina, and it's very nice to finally meet you. Thank you.